Hey dwraysgarage fans, thanks for checking in for another episode. This is very much a tutorial episode with the Plenum throttle body from IPD. And it's an excellent unit. My wife and I spent more time than we possibly should have putting it together. However, we were able to get it done and took care of the breathe-in part of the modifications that are underway in our More Power series. You should get some pro tips out of this, which should save you plenty of time. We were definitely feeling our way in the dark, even though IPD provides very thorough written instructions. I'm a visual learner, so those two worlds weren't ideally met. Net, I put this 10-minute video together to spare you some time, so hopefully you can get along pretty well with that. And I also just want to clarify, I'm an amateur and never pretended to be anything else, so hopefully you can learn from my mistakes. In this project, you'll be using a variety of Torx bits and some sockets, and you can see here we're basically unwinding some of the attachments, including the breather hoses, trying to get the Jubilee clip and Jubilee clamp away from the funnel which feeds down into the air intake, and just kind of loosening up the moving parts on the front side as it was facing us of the throttle body. Step was to move that middle clip, which the aluminum cover gets in on, just to create room, because when you lift up the actual plenum, you have some pieces behind there that you need to be careful of. So you lift up these rubber boots, which you just got to fight with a little bit, and you just peel it back. Definitely 4 hands are better than 2 in this scenario. And then you just got to jockey with the unit and work it around the shifter cables, which you'll see the instructions told me to loosen those up, and I thought I could get away without doing that, which proved to be true on the removal part, but you'll see on the insertion part you're just as well kind of biting the bullet and loosening up your shifter cables so you can actually create the freedom you need in order to insert the new plenum, which has zero forgiveness as it's a solid. So the unit's out, but we now have to contend with the actuators on the backhand side of this, and those actuators just you need to cut the 2 vacuum lines. You'll only ultimately be reusing one of these vacuum lines in the new plenum, and so you cut both hoses, and then once you've got the second hose, which is on the passenger side, you're provided an IPD plug to basically plug that one in. And I didn't do a great job of cutting this, so it wasn't completely square. Thankfully, I didn't need all of the length that was available to me there. And now the plenum is out. So you can see there I cleaned up my hose damage, and then start to go ahead and insert the plug to block off that side. Not sure why I took off the throttle body. That's an E12 or an E-Torx 12, size 12. To take off the throttle body from the old plenum. I think that was in the instructions, but I'm not completely sure why. It was interesting to look at nonetheless. It's 74 millimeters versus the 82 millimeter GT3 throttle body that we ultimately put in as part of this. This is where we removed the actuator from the back of the original plenum to reuse that, and where there are 2 actuators here on the original unit, the IPD plenum only requires that you use 1. Now the nice thing about having 2 is if you happen to break one, the rod, the ball joint, I'm not sure what it's called, the ball part, you'll see me monkeying with it here, it's pretty it's easy to break, I suppose is the best way to put it. So it recommends pliers in the instructions, but I thought this little prying tool would probably be the best way to just kind of have it pop off. It's a brittle feeling piece of plastic, but when I just kind of got the right angle on it, and you'll see where I just start to just bend on it when I get it right in the crux of the pry tool, it does ultimately give way there after you've removed the two screws that connect it to the original plenum. And because we've got that free now, we can go about getting it set up to go on the new one. This is a pretty quick and dirty part where I spent probably 3 minutes getting the remainder of the vacuum line, which was sitting in there because it's epoxied on at the factory. There's decent access to that, so as long as you've got a little scraper type tool, you can just kind of jockey away at the rubber until it ultimately gives way and gets out of there and reveals that nipple, which you can then have freed up to put the new vacuum line on from when you go back in on the new plenum. Now we just join the new throttle body to the new inlet pipe here. Nothing too complicated about that, just I think it's some maybe 7 or 8 mil screws there that you just attach that on. There is a pre-baked in rubber gasket. And the main thing to look at here when I hold this up is going to be the clocking of it, because you definitely need to make sure that the way it's oriented, one, to get it back in that tight spot, and two, because it seats best and only best in this particular clocking arrangement. So just pay attention to that when you're attaching it. It'll probably go on anyway, but it doesn't go on quite right. Next up was the flexible sleeve, which will connect down to the intake. Just getting that Jubilee clamp there on the end of the unit, which will then put onto the stock element in the vehicle, and then we get prepped up with the plenum itself by inserting the new actuator. And I think the instructions actually tell you to screw in the actuator first, and what I did was reattach that little ball joint setup, which we were able to get the screws in there, and we used the bottom 2 screw holes. There are 4 screw holes on there, but we figured out that the flap, and you'll see that shortly, for the flap to open and close, that was the orientation we needed. So we got those in. Required a little bit of finagling, but you can see how it basically always pushes out to the open position. And then as I manipulate the actuator like the air will do, you can see how it closes up there as the engine demands. You'll see the red circle here. This is where I did actually surrender and had to go into the main center console and just remove the shifter cable so we could get just the freed up room up so we could get the new plenum in there. And then you manipulate the rubber boots on the sides, making sure that you've got the steel clamps in the bottom, and then just kind of jockey it around in there. The one thing I would tell you that we did wrong is we probably should have been, and I don't think the instructions led us this way, we should have put the vacuum line into the actuator on the back there, because we did wind up taking this back out later on to put that in. So if you can get that in first, that will be my proest of pro tips, especially if you don't want your wife screaming at you about removing it, which frankly, once you've done it once, it only takes 5 minutes. But let's just say tensions will run high at that point. Then you gently just clamp down with the metal clamps. They sit perfectly over the rubber boots, and then you just kind of hold that in there, place that in there, so you've got a little bit of wiggle. They actually kind of lock in at the back with a metal clamp around, so the top and the bottom half moons latch into one another, and then they are flipped around. Originally, when you take it out, you don't have the screws. And then you just set those in so you can start to get the inlet, the new metal inlet pipe, connected to the front of the plenum. So once you've secured that second clamp down and got it just a couple of turns in on that screw so it's secured, now it's time to secure the inlet on the front side of the plenum to get that basically all sealed through. And there's just a couple of bolts going there. You have to really kind of strong arm it and use the very limited amount of those 3 inches of that flexible sleeve to basically get across, get those bolts lined up and get those secured in there. And that's basically it, minus reconnecting, the breather hoses. One of the breather hoses lines you can see there gets blocked off. You got to tank down the Jubilee clip by the inlet. Make sure you plug back in the throttle body to the electrical, so that gets the messages from the ECU. And that basically completes it. Hopefully we spared you some time and energy, and the plenum's installed. And next up is a tune to make sure we get that air-fuel ratio and all the other stuff running great. Thanks for checking in for this video. Be memorable, be well, and we look forward to catching you in the next one when we're jamming on the exhaust.